2 years ago today, Tom Hooper's nightmare vision of cats entered our lives.
A transcendental masterpiece.
And in the time since then, things have been a little bit different.
Yeah, you could say that a little bit.
And I think it's fair to say that this movie meant a lot to us.
I think we've each seen it a grand total of 7 full times in the past 2 years. Each.
7 times each.
So that was... It came out 2 years ago today, right?
Yeah.
I think that this is a perfect opportunity for our very first special episode of Banquet at the Flum Dumpster.
It's a Cats episode, everyone.
We're gonna talk about cats!
Shield your eyes or put your sanity in slumber. Curiosity's killing you no longer. Feast your senses on something more palatable. Squeeze in with the clutter for an episode like no other. Pick straight from the gutter here, it's almost never lackluster. Sit right down for supper at the banquet at the Flum Dumpster.
So this is going to be a bit different of an episode than our usual ones. Because this is our first special episode where we don't watch a movie, and instead just talk about a movie that we've already both seen.
7 times. Again.
In this case, 7 times.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. But the idea of this is to, look back. So I pitched this to you as, a look back at the 2 years that have passed since Cats came out and talk about our experience with this masterpiece. Because this feels like a kind of journey.
I said a couple of episodes ago that I would take this up with you in the Cats episode. That 2021 is the continuation, the extension of 2020.
Yes.
And it feels like time has not passed in a convincing way.
And that's kind of why I want to talk about this, because I feel like what's interesting to me is how you can kind of trace the last 2 years through Cats.
Mm-hmm. There is that meme that I saw that was like a graph that was the release of Cats the movie as like a peak point on the graph, and then the graph immediately shoots down, followed by the caption, "Things start going to shit." As in drawing a causal connection between the release of Cats the movie and the current apocalypse that we're living in. It has kind of been a bit of a journey these past 2 years through Cats. Are we going to talk about the text of the film of Cats at all? Or are we just going to contextualize it within our lives? This was your idea for this episode.
I mean, okay, let's pretend there's someone out there that hasn't seen Cats. Some ridiculous person who has no idea what we're talking about. How would you describe it to them? Someone who has not seen the movie, doesn't know about the movie, but is listening to this episode and is still around.
Okay. In the year 1909, T.S. Eliot did an unhealthy amount of opium and wrote a series of poems that he published in a book called Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. Sometime in the 80s, Andrew Lloyd Webber read this book after doing an ungodly amount of cocaine and said, "This needs to be a musical." And then, in the year of our Lord, 2019, or maybe a couple of years sooner, because that's how film production works, Tom Hooper looked at this musical and went, "I think I could make a movie off of that." And I think that the most important thing to describe about Cats the movie is to contextualize it within the way that the effects of the Broadway production worked, because the Broadway production of Cats depended very heavily on like representational cat makeup to make its actors evoke the idea of cats, like the idea of being cats, without actually like looking anything like cats themselves.
And practical effects done in a different way than like The Lion King did on Broadway, which was much more interpretive. There is still that, but it's very makeup heavy and costumes.
And this is something that's kind of exclusive to the medium of theater. It's something that kind of only works in theater. Mm-hmm. You can't get away with representational effects on film. There's a kind of expectation for realism there.
When you're making like a real movie musical and not just like a staged recording.
Yeah, exactly. And so to adapt this musical from the stage to the cinema, the use of CGI animation produced an absolutely horrific result. Why was it CGI? Because CGI is how blockbuster cinema does everything these days.
It's the current medium.
It's just how things are done now. Mm-hmm. I feel like in many ways, Cats is like peak cinema. And
in what way?
In a way that it's not especially great, but every single moment, for better or worse, in film history has brought us to Cats 2019. And regardless of what we think about Cats 2019, we need to live with the consequences of that.
So I've said something similar. I actually have a theory that it's not that Cats itself is inevitable. I think that this version of Cats being made in 2019 by Tom Hooper was inevitable, and there was just no other way that it could have happened. Like, using film history. Hear me out.
Okay.
To explain that theory, I also need to go back about as far as you. I need to go back to the advent of synchronous sound. Not 1909, about 1927, because I want to talk about the history of musicals for a second, because this is, of course, an adaptation of a Broadway musical, as you said. And if you look at, like, the first few decades of synchronous sound cinema, like the 30s, 40s, 50s, this was the time of the musical, where this was Hollywood's slam dunk genre. Like, this was like, you could put out a musical and everyone would watch it. We don't live in that world anymore. But, because in the late 50s, it started to change. Like, there were fewer and fewer movie musicals, and it's where you start to get this, like, ebb and flow throughout the rest of the 20th century and into now. Of, like, you would get a lot of movies at once, and then a bunch of years where there were just none, where you would have dozens earlier. And a big part of that was the loss of these Broadway adaptations. Like, Broadway adaptation was the easiest way to make the traditional movie musical that people think of. You know? The last huge wave, I think, came in the 60s, where you had, like, West Side Story started it, and then you'd have, like, The Music Man, Gypsy, Bye Bye Birdie, My Fair Lady, and The Sound of Music, which, in that stretch, that was, like, a 4-year stretch that was just perfect in terms of, like, what people wanted from a box office musical. And then you had this kind of fade of, like, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, How to Succeed in Business Without Even Trying, Finian's Rainbow, which may have killed the whole genre itself. I don't know. It is, yeah. But then you had, like, a few last hits of, like, Oliver, Funny Girl, Hello Dolly, that were, like, big. Like, in that period, 4 out of 8 of the Best Picture winners at the Oscars were movie musicals adapted from Broadway.
Oh.
So like that was like a period that it just went out, and right after that, it essentially dies.
So why did it die all of a sudden?
So it's interesting because it's just like the other slam dunk genre of the like old Hollywood, the Western.
Oh.
Where it kind of disappears, I think, based on people's changing viewing habits. Like it doesn't necessarily correspond to like people not wanting to go to Broadway, but it's just interesting where you still do have some. Mm-hmm. They just are the same kind of culturally changing movies that like people could rely on to fill in a slot at theater. But like there were some like Fiddler on the Roof, Cabaret, Rocky Horror, of course. But by the time you get to like 1982, where Cats debuts on Broadway, this wasn't really an opportunity to do a proper Broadway adaptation. So like if I'm saying this is when Cats had to be adapted, it couldn't have been in the 80s because that just wasn't the climate for a movie adaptation of a Broadway musical. Whereas, and so like in the 90s, right? Like, so the 80s, I think there were maybe like a couple. Like Little Shop of Horrors and A Chorus Line would be like the two big ones, but that's in a full decade.
Yeah.
This was like unprecedented to not have that many movie musicals.
Cats did have like a direct-to-video stage recording that was released for its like 25th anniversary or something in like 1998.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like that was in the 90s, and like there was a stage version, but like why wouldn't there be a proper adaptation? Like the Evita, another Andrew Lloyd Webber movie musical, came out in the 90s with Antonio Banderas. And you're like, okay, that's the only significant movie musical in a full decade. But what I think is interesting, like the only significant Broadway adaptation, because there were movie musicals, it was just like all Disney. Because Disney movie musicals, like they started the animated movie musical, Snow White, came and like they put out ones every few years for a while, but they had the same dark period as the movie musical. You know what I mean? Like, so after the Jungle Book, essentially, like in that area, after the 60s, there was a stretch where Disney kind of fell off. And it coincides with the same dark period for musicals where Disney comes back in like 1989 with The Little Mermaid, and they have that unprecedented like 10-year period where they just blasted out hit after hit. Like Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Nightmare Before Christmas, which I know was Touchstone released it, but it was still a Disney movie. Lion King, Pocahontas, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules, Mulan, Tarzan. Like, this was a stretch that they basically... We're living in a post-Disney Golden Age era for movie musicals.
I think I've heard that era of Disney referred to as like a Disney Renaissance a couple of times, like anecdotally. Yeah. I feel like that's what people call it.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
But so like, because for example, in the 2000s, there was an effort, I think, to bring back the classic Broadway adaptation musical. And this is like Chicago, you could look at as starting it. And, you know, again, like this could have been a time where you could have adapted an Andrew Lloyd Webber property. It just had to be Phantom of the Opera, not Cats. Cats had to be the last of his big plays to be put to film. Because Phantom of the Opera is just less weird.
Sorry, where's the live-action adaptation of, I think it's called Starlight Express, the Cats, but it's trains? Like, that's what I'm saying. I want Tom Hooper to bring back the actor who played Skimbleshanks for an adaptation of Starlight Express.
So you're saying you don't want Robert Zemeckis to make a sequel to Polar Express called The Starlight Express?
No, because I don't want it to be done with CGI, because that's what didn't work about Cats. The way that you do it, you use model trains like they did on Thomas the Tank Engine, and that's how you adapt Starlight. You model trains.
Got it.
Musical.
Yeah,
that's my pitch.
I think that's very fair.
Tom Hooper, give me a call.
Speaking of Tom Hooper, I do think, though, because I am getting around to a point eventually.
I know you are.
Because throughout this timeline, you have original movie musicals as well. You know, like, I kind of have excluded them to this point, because other than the Disney ones, because, like, they, you know, those do exist, but I'm talking about Broadway here. You know, like, Dirty Dancing is out there for sure. Like, you're not going, but that isn't exactly in the same vein. Footloose, like, those aren't the same thing as taking a Broadway musical, putting it on film, and thinking that's going to do well. That's what Cats was. Because there were still these traditional Broadway adaptations that came after Les Miserables. Because Les Miserables was huge. Like, Les Mis was this, like, genuine people were talking about it kind of event in the same way that the old musicals were. The ones that followed, Annie, Into the Woods, Jersey Boys, the last 5 years, the Sapphires, you could talk about them. I don't think they had the same type of impact combined that Les Mis had. And those kind of show that the traditional model was still not going to cut it. But studios are still making them with brought-out adaptations of, like, West Side Story, In the Heights, The Prom, Dear Evan Hansen. Like, those have all come out recently. Or, like, West Side Story about to come out. But they can kind of be considered in this new wave, if you want. I would argue, though, that's all part of the same one started by Tom Hooper. And I know you know where I'm going with this. I want to talk about the live TV specials.
I don't know where you're going with this.
The live TV specials carried forward this era into Cats, where, if you remember, there were just a bunch of specials that aired on different networks of, they just started putting on stage versions, not with, like, original cast or anything, just putting in stars of The Sound of Music live, Peter Pan live, The Wiz live, Grease live, Hairspray, Christmas Story, Rent, Rocky Horror had one that was...
It was supposed to be live, wasn't it? And then they recorded it. And then they sold it as, like, a remake.
Yeah. Other ones, though, were actually done live. Like, it was just, you were basically showing, oh, this is theater, but it's on a screen. And they're notable adaptations because they're feeding into this perceived clamor for Broadway on screen. You know, this decade was just people, like, the powers that be thinking, we need to give Broadway back. Like, we need Broadway back into people's lives. And I don't know if those ended because of Cats or COVID, but something killed those. But that, of course, there's the clamor for Broadway properties that people think is out there.
Yeah.
And that combines with, I mentioned Disney earlier, but you know where I'm going with this one now, the live-action remakes of Disney animations.
Oh, yeah, those.
So they had the Disney Gold, like, Renaissance, and then, you know, we're starting to just see them thinking, okay, let's recreate that with Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, you know, Cinderella was an older one, but still, like, redoing that. Most importantly, The Jungle Book, Dumbo, and The Lion King.
Yeah.
Because you have this inevitable situation where studios have the belief that there's still a clamor for Broadway adaptations. There's a director who kicked all of this off in 2012. There's a huge Broadway property out there that hasn't been adapted before. And there are these animated movie musical remakes showing off this groundbreaking technology that would allow it to finally be adapted, quote-unquote, properly. All of this leads into the 2019 Cats adaptation. Feel free to disagree.
I mean, you did just elaborate on the joke that I made. I did mean it as a joke when I said that Cats was peak cinema and the inevitable result of all of film history that came before it.
Yes, you said it as a joke.
Thank you for summarizing all of film history to convince me that my joke was not actually a joke. And backing up my, admittedly, sweeping, unsupportable statement with support. And I appreciate that.
That is why I'm here. Yeah.
I think, like, I like your idea of reflecting on the past, like, the ways that the world has changed over the past 2 years through our collective experiences with cats.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, like, let's talk about... So, like I said, I want to talk about the first night we saw cats.
I want to go back further than that.
Okay.
I think that if we want to truly understand the experience of cats, we need to start with the trailer.
Oh, very true. Yes. Okay.
I don't know how you first saw the trailer. I remember...
You sent it to me.
Did I send it to you?
You sent it to me.
I remember the day before the trailer dropped, they released, like, a teaser video, and I remember, like, and it just had, like, Taylor Swift in it, and, like, a couple of the other actors talking about the cats, and I distinctly remember one person on Twitter commenting, and I saw this comment, interesting that they're not showing the cats. And as soon as I saw that, I was intrigued. And I anticipated the release of the trailer that was advertised for the following day. And I remember watching that trailer, and I remember the moment when Francesca Hayward turns around to reveal what the cats in Cats look like. And I remember that visceral feeling of being so disturbed, but finding it so funny.
Yes.
And
that, yeah.
What was your first and like, I watched that trailer like so many times because I was so fascinated by this thing, and it gained so much attention. I don't know, what was your first experience like watching the trailer of Cats?
So my first thought when I was watching the trailer was I loved it. I wanted to see it. I didn't think we were going to, because I thought they were going to see what had happened, because I watched it because everyone was talking about it. Mm-hmm. I thought they were going to put it in the can and redo it. Oh. Like what they did with Sonic. Where the reaction to the trailer of Sonic was, everybody is terrified of this. Mm-hmm. We are going to change it. Mm-hmm. And they changed it. They, released the movie, and we never got to see the full version of Sonic that everyone was terrified of. We got to see the version of Cats, and I have to think that's because they'd passed the point of no return. But I didn't think we were going to.
I do remember reading somewhere, I don't have a citation for this off the top of my head, but I do remember reading somewhere that after shooting was finished on Cats, they had I don't know how much time to just work on animating the trailer, and they only focused on animating the trailer. And then after the trailer dropped, they had to do the rest of the movie.
Wow.
I think that something has to be included in this conversation about how part of the reason why there is so much CGI animation right now is that CGI animators are not unionized.
Well, I think that we have to talk about just the stories of, when you have a director who has no idea how to do a CGI movie and has no idea how long something like that would take, you get a bunch of suggestions that are unrealistic, take too long, and are never going to be achievable. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think you get Cats from.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about how, the film was shot with mocap suits, but it was also shot on live sets. Yeah. All of those, not all of them, most of the sets in that film were actually constructed, like, in real life to be, like, 3 times human scale. And, like, if you watch the special features on the DVD of Cats, which I own, they look genuinely impressive. But when they're populated by these CGI cat bodies, they look so uninteresting and underwhelming, because we've kind of, I feel like there's a degree to which we've kind of become a little bit desensitized to CGI. I feel like CGI animators are overworked and underpaid, and also their work is underappreciated because we kind of know what CGI looks like now and don't really care about it as much as we used to. It's lost its novelty.
Oh yeah. No, I think that the thing with the CGI in Cats and the combination with the actual sets, it goes back to the idea that, like, this was trying to be a bit of a break from that, like, CGI fatigue of doing something that seemed a little different. You know, because CGI Broadway adaptation was not a thing.
But let's go back to running through the past 2 years of experiences that we've had watching Cats. And I'm just looking at the time. We should probably do this a little bit faster.
Yeah.
We both had too much fun going on our respective tangents.
Yes. So when we went to go see the first, like, we went opening night. That is how excited we were about this movie.
Oh, yeah.
I think that there was, like, this build-up where you watched the recording of the stage version leading up to it.
Yeah, I wanted to have a base level familiarity with Cats before I watched the film adaptation, so I tracked down that 1998 stage recording and I watched that.
I also love that you went with that and not the literal production that was going on in Toronto.
Well, I wasn't living in Toronto at that time. I was living in Vancouver. I was finishing up my master's.
Yeah, but it was going on. You were in Toronto when we saw Cats.
Yeah.
And Anne, who we went to go see it with, thought we were going to the play. So I know that it was going on at the same time. You could have gone to see it. I'm just saying.
Anne, who, for the record, did our cover art for this podcast.
Yes.
Thank you, Anne.
Yes. She thought we were seeing the play. We were not.
Speaking of people who were involved behind the scenes with this podcast who are also at this screening of Cats, Tarquin, who did the theme songs for us, was at that screening of Cats on opening night, but not with us, just by coincidence, because she's a huge Taylor Swift fan. And she could hear me laughing from the other side of the theater and hid from us on the way out.
Which I do not blame her for.
I think it speaks to how deeply we were enjoying that movie.
Yeah.
That Tarquin felt the need to not interact with us afterwards.
But seeing it that night, I feel like we were not the only ones in that theater that were enjoying it to the extent that we were.
No, like, there was applause from the moment that the Universal logo came up.
Yeah. People knew what they were in for, and I loved that. I loved that that's what we were in for. And, of course, we cannot not talk about the person in the front row of our screening who made this screening for us.
Oh, there are so many elements that made this screening for us. But was
this screening in particular.
Okay, nothing will ever top going to see Cats the movie on opening night. Nothing will. But there was this one woman in our particular screening. She sounded a little bit on the older side. And she sounded
a little on the intoxicated side.
Just
too.
A little bit. Towards the end of the movie, around the magical Mr. Mistopheles.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just start hearing this talking from the front row.
Heckling.
Not quite heckling. It sounded like she was having a conversation with herself. or a conversation with someone on the phone, or like...
But, like, she would say stuff like, oh, that one looks like my sister in the morning, or stuff like that. Like, when Idris Elba appears naked on the parapet or whatever he does, like, she's like, oh, that's a big one. She was doing some talkback, some random stuff, like, I need help with the New York Times crossword puzzle. There were definitely some where she was talking to herself or missing the whole point of talkbacks.
There were some that were, like, really crude, too. Like, oh, I'd suck a dick for that cat.
Oh, yeah. There were.
Or, like,
but the whole
he fucked my niece. Something like that.
Yeah. And it was increasingly funny and weird.
Yeah,
like,
and
it
like,
was...
and there was a sense that like other people in the audience were trying to be respectful and trying not to like openly laugh at her, because she was clearly someone, like, she was having a time. And like it was a very respectful audience. Nobody wanted to make it a thing until
we were all laughing enough at the movie.
Yeah. But it created such a communal experience because she started like clapping or snapping during like the magical Mr. Mistopheles, and
we all were clapping
everybody
along with that song,
everybody started joining in. They started clapping along, snapping along,
I think we were
singing
doing the
along.
wave.
There may have been. I don't remember that part, but you have a better memory than I do.
Not like the one where like goes around the stadium, like they're like waving our arms back and forth is what I'm currently miming.
But like it reminds me what, like, moments like these remind me what is so special about in-person movie theaters that I miss so much about in-person movie theaters, because it really did create a communal experience. It really did feel like everybody else in that theater was having the same ironic experience with Cats the movie on opening night that I was, and it was kind of magical. And then it became even more magical because there's this moment at the emotional climax of the film, right before Jennifer Hudson goes in to sing Memory, where there is almost complete silence. And that's where this one woman at the front starts really audibly talking. And then Jennifer Hudson starts singing, and then she takes a beat. There's total silence, and in that moment,
right after she sings the first Memory,
right after she sings the first line of the song, this woman in the front row belches. The loudest belch that I have ever heard, and the entire theater loses it. The entire theater just starts laughing.
I was crying. I did not see a single moment of Jennifer Hudson's performance of Memory in that screening.
I did not see a single moment of Jennifer Hudson's performance of Memory for about a year after that, because every time I watched that scene, I remembered that moment and I could not stop laughing.
Yeah.
It was incredible. The second time that I saw Cats with my brother, right after we both saw The Rise of Skywalker and found Cats to be far more enjoyable, I started laughing at this moment, and there was a man behind me who was like clearly trying to enjoy the movie, who was like very much annoyed at me and my brother for laughing at it at all the wrong moments. And I do distinctly remember him saying, what the fuck is so funny about this? And I kind of feel really bad for him because I kind of spoiled this movie for him. And I couldn't explain
there
that
was also the one person in our first screening who did not appreciate the woman in the front row and went to complain and ask for his money back, which I wonder why it was that woman who he felt he needed the money back and not the movie. But anyways, that's somebody who doesn't know how to have fun. And then we also saw it a third time.
Well, I saw it a third time. I think this was your second time watching it.
Yes. So I saw it. Yeah, I saw it for my second time. Your third time.
Yeah.
with two of our friends, Sam and Maria.
You brought a saucer of milk to lap up?
Yes, I did. It was mostly for the one part where Sir Ian McKellen...
Classically trained British actor Sir Ian McKellen laps milk out of a shallow bowl. That's one of the highlights of Cats, yes.
I was waiting for that scene, but in the meantime I got thirsty, so I was just lapping up milk, much to the disgust of other people who saw me lapping up milk. That's where we both got our posters.
Yeah, we did interact with a human at Canada Square, and we asked if we could get posters to Cats, because it was one of the last days that it was screening there.
It was the last screening of the last day of Cats at any theater in Toronto.
Yeah, you might be right. I think I saw it afterwards, though. Or maybe I saw it for a fourth time before that. Yeah, because we would have seen that in January. No, yes. I think I saw it one more time. I did see it one more time because I did have a conversation with a neighbor who was like, oh, I really want to see Cats, but I don't have any friends that would want to see this movie with me, ironically. And I was like, I'll watch it for a fourth time with you. And so then I went to see Cats for a fourth time. But yeah, we got posters for Cats the movie. I have one up in my bedroom, and it's the greatest thing that I own.
It's like having that is just like, I feel like I'm going to look back on that in 20 years and just like I want to still have it. Yeah. Because it will just represent this point in time.
I tried to get it framed, but frames for posters of that size are ungodly expensive.
Yes. Yeah. But anyways, after you saw it 4 times, what happened?
Well, I went in like late January. I went to a grad film studies conference, and I delivered a paper titled "The Social Pleasure of Bad Cinema," and I didn't plan on talking about Cats, but every single other grad student in film studies at that conference had so much to say about Cats.
Yeah.
It was like the talk of the town. Everyone wanted to talk about Cats. And I told my story of our screening of it on opening night when one of my colleagues described how they found themselves tearing up during the memory number. And I had to explain why I found that so funny.
We were also tearing up for a different reason. But I was referencing the fact that you talked about it on the news.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, like a news promotion, not a news promotion, someone attached to the university that I did my MA at, he got in touch with me because apparently one of my professors usually talks to him about the Oscars around that time of year. And he had gotten wind that I just wrote a master's thesis on bad cinema and was like, oh, I'll talk to this weirdo about the Razzies. And so I got an email from him asking to connect to talk about the Razzies. And I went, yeah, I can have a conversation with you about the Razzies. But I had to watch the other movies that were nominated for the Razzie that year.
Which I think you believe were all worse than Cats.
Oh, yeah. I had to watch in the span of like a week while very, very sick. Like I had one of a very bad flu. I had to watch The Fanatic, The Haunting of Sharon Tate, A Medea Family Funeral, and Rambo Last Blood. Cats was the most watchable movie nominated for a Razzie that year. I don't understand how Cats won, but anyways, this is a tangent because I had this conversation about the Razzies, but the guy from UBC seemed most interested in talking to me about how I had, at this point, seen Cats 4 whole times. And that became the headline of the like press release put out on the official university website. And that became the story that got picked up on by a good handful of like news sites. I think I was featured on like the Tyee, BC independent news organization, and that's just off the top of my head.
Global News.
Oh yeah, I was getting to that. Then I got an email from Global News asking to interview me for a segment. And so Global News came to my parents' house and interviewed me in my parents' living room. You can probably find the clip online if you want to. And they seemed to think that by some broken telephone, that I had done my master's thesis on Cats the movie.
Right.
I don't know how that math works in their mind because it just came out. So I had an interview with them. They cut out all of the film theory that I talked about. They kept all of my jokes. They were not
so like this podcast, yeah.
Yeah, they were not great jokes. But my face was on Global News in a story about this weirdo film student who watched Cats the movie 4 times.
But so I think that what the reason why that got picked up over the rest of the Razzies discussion is kind of like why we're still talking about it now. Because there's like, from that moment, from everybody talking about it at that moment, there was this like, it was so ripe to be a cult phenomenon. I remember when the world shut down, I was walking by the Hot Docs Theater, which is another theater in Toronto, and there were people who were coming out of like a laugh back screening or a meow back screening or something, and I was
this so wanted to go to that.
I know. I was like, how did I not hear about that? I started looking up things, and I saw that people were casting for a Shadow Cats.
No.
Like a Shadow Cast that was for Shadow Cats. And I emailed them, and I was like, I will be in your Shadow Cat thing. I had an audition lined up. I think it was for March 22nd.
No! I didn't hear anything about this. You never told me about this.
No, well, because I didn't even audition for it. I was going for, they apparently somebody had made the Mr. Mistopheles outfit with all the buttons, or had acquired one from a stage production or something. And I was like, I would love to be in that role because it does not require much singing. And I had an audition lined up, and it all fell apart.
No.
I heard from it later that they were like, I even got an email later, they were like, oh yeah, like, we're not doing this. And I was like, I get it. I know why. I also, so in that time when you were watching it 4 times, I watched it with my colleagues over Zoom. And you watched it with your parents, right?
Yeah, my parents wanted to see this weird movie that I was interviewed on Global News to talk about. And so they were like, Jared, we want to watch Cats with you. And I was like, are you sure? They both hated it.
This was at home, though.
This was at home with my like boomer parents who just like wanted to. Just
I want to clarify, not in theater.
No, yeah, this was
they
like
could have left at any time.
I think my mom did walk out. No, this was after I received my DVD Blu-ray combo pack of Cats in the mail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I watched it with some colleagues at work. We watched the director's cut together.
Not the director's cut. The director's commentary. On my birthday. On my birthday, I brought a television outdoors
into the backyard.
Into my parents' backyard, and we watched the director's commentary on Cats from a very sad Tom Hooper.
Very. I think that it takes place in the time where he knows how it's going to turn out, but he doesn't know what people think of it.
No, I think it might have been like, it must have been recorded at least after the release of the first trailer, but based on the timeline that I've heard rumored, that it was like finished like the day before it went out to theaters, he must have recorded it like after reviews came in.
Yeah.
Like, after he knew that everybody hated this movie, and it shows just in his voice. He sounds so sad.
That I also watched it another time when the election was happening, because there were just... I had to pull my way, like the U.S. federal election that seemed to last like 3 months. And I was like, I gotta pull myself away from the screen and just relax, and I wanted to watch something, but every other movie I turned on, I could not stop thinking about the election and thinking like, oh, I should look at the results that were coming in. So I was just like, you know what I gotta watch? Cats.
That's really smart. I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, so I watched it then. That I also had the amazing coincidental moment where at the same time that Joe Biden was officially named president, the Spotify Wrapped came out, and my number one song of the year was Skimbleshanks the Railway Cat.
That is the best song in the whole movie.
It is the best song by far, but still, it made everything worth it that year. That year was just perfect because of that, and I will not take any more questions.
And then I watched it for a 7th time, the last time that I saw this movie all the way through, when I was preparing for a paper that I was going to write on cats, that I have written and I have submitted to an academic publication all the way back in June. But academic publications are fairly finicky, so I haven't heard back from them yet, one way or the other. So it's entirely possible that it will get accepted still. It is also entirely possible that it will also get rejected. And I have no idea one way or another.
You will see it online as a Patreon reward or something.
As a Patreon reward, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah. I also we also for that paper we watched the special features as well.
Yeah.
Which I found also very interesting, because those also felt like they were mostly made before any of the people involved had seen it.
Yeah.
Because you have all of the actors and creative people talking about it like this is going to be a life-changing moment for everybody involved.
It was a life-changing moment for me.
Yeah, but it was not the type of life-changing moment that Taylor Swift wanted.
There was also, I don't know, does it count as an 8th screening of Cats if I put it on in the background while writing the paper on mute so that I could, like, get up and look at a furry cat body and get inspired?
I think it being on mute, you don't get the full Cats experience.
So, like, can I say 7.5?
Maybe 7.5.
Okay.
Yeah. And later we will have 8.5.
Yes.
But I did watch it one more time this morning because I wanted to have it fresh in my mind. And so I also have now watched it 7 times, but without the half.
Did you have any new observations about it? Watching it for a 7th time.
So it had been a little while. The most interesting thing for me was watching it today and thinking, okay, what can we talk about? And there wasn't anything new, because it has just become like everything about it. I've now reached the point in 7 viewings of something where I think that I have fully experienced it.
Yeah, that's the thing about watching Cats 7 times, 7.5 times. Every single time that I watch Cats again, it starts to feel more normal.
Yeah. And that's what's interesting, is that it's not that, like, the CGI has gotten better. It's just become like you're starting to kind of appreciate new things about it, and the things that you never thought that you would actually appreciate about this movie. And you're like, that you start to, like, after you watch the special features, I started to appreciate the sets a little more. And I started to like feel pity for the cast for having to go to cat school. And all of this. And I think that, like, that's where I think it's remained top of mind, and I think it has had an impact on this podcast.
Oh yeah.
On some level, like, we are also living in this world where Cats has become this mainstream go-to example for a nanar. A movie that's so bad it's good, in the way that there have been others, but this is one that is so recent that when we can come out and talk about these movies, people can think about that. I'm sure that in all of our episodes, when we talk about so bad it's good movies, there are a lot of people who think, oh yeah, like Cats.
Yeah. And I feel like it has, like, doing this podcast in a post-Cats society, I think that, like, the experience of Cats has influenced and informed a lot of what we talk about here. And in a lot of under the surface ways, I feel like we haven't, I'm thinking back to the episodes that we've recorded so far, and I don't think that we make as many references to Cats as we make to, like, lesser known figures like David Dakota or something.
No, we haven't. I just feel like the audience, when we talk about, oh, this is so bad it's a good movie, I think that it's like you're putting it in line with Cats because that's just the most recent, like, it was what Birdemic was, The Room, but on a bigger scale.
But I think that I also want to say that Cats isn't bad.
Really?
There are only two main problems with Cats the movie. One is the plot, which makes no sense.
But that was also a problem with the musical.
That was mostly a problem with the musical. There are, like, added attempts to, like, Hollywoodize the plot and add, like, more of a through line to it that make less sense than they did before. Yeah. But, like, the plot
it was always going to be surreal. It was
always gonna be narratively messy to adapt Cats. And the only other problem with Cats is the cats.
Yeah, but
like, aside from
movie.
that, like, the music is fine. I know there are people who disagree with me. I know that there are like whole YouTube videos out there about, like, how the music of Cats is awful and why it's awful. But, like, it's fine. Like, the choice...
I would say it is fine with the exception of Skimbleshanks, the railway cat.
Which is great.
Great.
Yeah. Like, the choice to have actors sing live is, like, you can debate whether or not that choice works, but it is, like you were kind of saying earlier, a kind of attempt at coming out ahead of that CGI fatigue, of making, like, an experience that feels in some way authentic. It's an interesting choice. Whether or not it succeeds at doing so is another matter entirely, but I think that it's an interesting enough aesthetic idea that, like...
I think everything about Cats was a risk. And that's where I think that like, everybody say, like, this like, all of the people involved saying, I want to do this, like, we're gonna pack this thing with legitimate, like, Hollywood recognizable names, like what you did with the live action television specials, like the Grease Live, Hairspray Live, like what they did with that, but with CGI, with Cats, with singing live, with these giant sets. Everything could have, like, worked in a certain way, and that's where I feel like you can't say it was necessarily flawed from the start, And in that way, I can agree that there were aspects about it that worked. But I think that if you're looking straight at, did the people who like this movie like it because of the reasons that the filmmakers and everyone involved wanted them to? Everybody who worked on that movie is embarrassed of it. Andrew Lloyd Webber, there was that thing about him, like, needing a therapy dog or something because he was, like, he had to think about Cats, the adaptation. And that's the thing, like, this is a movie that you can debate whether it succeeded or failed. The public has decided that it has failed.
Yeah, I think that I'm allowed to disagree with the public a little bit.
Oh, you can.
I think that, like, I have seen movies, and we have seen movies, and we have already watched movies on this podcast, cough, cough, child fucking bride, that are so much less watchable. Like, again,
I don't think it's unwatchable, but that's where it's a nanar more than...
And I'm starting to wonder if part of what makes a nanar is that little bit of pleasure.
Oh, it is.
And there is a pleasure in Cats. There is a pleasure in the music. There is a pleasure in the choreography. There may not be a pleasure in the cats, but they are funny enough.
Yeah.
That, like, and so, like, it
needs it because it's longer than most.
Yeah.
Nanars. It's like probably the longest nanar out there. No, I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
I think that it does need that element of what I'm watching is genuinely enjoyable in order to have the cult potential that something like a Rocky Horror does. Like, Rocky Horror, I think, succeeds more than Cats, but the reason it's become this cult thing is because of the weirdness. But the songs in that movie are great. The performances are, like, just genuinely out there in a way that you can just be like, it's campy, and I want to keep watching it.
So is that what you think is next for Cats? Do you think that Cats is going to become another Rocky Horror? Or another The Room?
I think that if theaters hadn't shut down for 2 years, we would have been seeing a lot of these kinds of Cats shadowcast screenings. You would have seen a full talkback script developing, which that took years for Rocky Horror to develop.
Yeah.
But I think that like, Cats could have that, and I think it still might. I think that, like,
I already have, like, certain talkback lines that I use whenever I watch Cats.
Yeah, maybe
I always
one day
burp at that exact moment.
One day
Or
we will put together a full talkback script, release it on the internet, and welcome feedback and edits if we don't find that one has created.
And when you say that, where do you think we'll release that?
Oh, maybe we'll release it on our Patreon, which we also just launched today.
Yeah, so there's a bit of an announcement from us attached to this episode. As of today,
because it's our first special episode.
This is our first special episode, and we will be launching Patreon for you to support this show on, if that is something that you want to do. If that is something that you want to do, we are committed to making that worth your while, and we are also committed to making that part of being worth your while as accessible as possible. So the way that we have envisioned this is not that we will have many, many different tiers of support, but we will have just one tier where you get everything that we're offering, but we are going to have growth goals. So as we grow the amount of money that we are making off of Patreon, we will release certain things like maybe my master's thesis, maybe the original live reaction that we had to Cats the very first time that we saw it.
We recorded, like, from
we walked
the food
into a
court
in the movie theater. We recorded our initial thoughts.
And it's like we don't have it online, but it's out there, and we will put it online for you. Because I think like that's one of the first ones we might do. Because,
we might even have that one up right now.
We can have that up as once you join. If you sign up, that will be what you get.
Yeah.
As a thank you for joining us.
Hi, Jared from the future here. Another thing that you will get if you sign up to our Patreon is an extended version of this episode, because the initial version, after editing, clocked in at nearly an hour and 20 minutes long, and that feels a bit unreasonable to release to the public. From my perspective, they don't need that much. They don't need that much cats in their life, but you might.
And like in the future, we would like to do things like release that movie Life Hacks that we made like 6 years ago. That's deliberately horrible.
We'll also do maybe like polls for what you want to see.
Patreon exclusive episodes. I have talked to Tarquin, and at a certain growth level, she will release extended versions of all of our theme songs exclusively onto Patreon, including the marvelous special episode theme song that you heard at the beginning of this episode.
And so I would say go to patreon.com/flumdumpster to go just see what everything's going on there. And if you feel like contributing, we would love you to have you.
We would love you to. It would be a great way to grow our podcast, because it would allow us to afford certain things like better equipment, so that I'm not recording this episode on my iPhone. It would allow us to purchase the DVDs for rare movies that we want to talk about but can't find otherwise. It would allow us to pay Tarquin royalties for the theme song that she has recorded, just like as a favor to me. And in an ideal world, you, dear listener, could fund my PhD research.
Yes, that is, I'm sure, what all of our listeners want, is to fund your PhD. So make sure to go to Patreon and do that. I know I'll be contributing. But yeah, I have been Eric Tish. You can find me watching Cats an eighth time
to catch up
Jared.
with
me. No, we're both watching it an eighth time.
Okay.
You're at 7.5, but maybe this will be a half as well.
Maybe I'll spend it on my phone just to even things out. I have been Jared Aronoff. You can find me on Twitter at Jared Aronoff.
You can find Tarquin on Twitter at TARQ Alexandra.
And you can find the show on Twitter at Flum Dumpster. You can also find us on Instagram at Flum Dumpster. I think we recently surpassed 100 followers on Instagram. Is that true?
Yeah, a while ago, yeah. We're cruising on Instagram.
We're cruising on Instagram. Go follow us on Instagram.
We are an influencer.
That's an overstatement. And you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/flumdumpster.
Yeah. And, I am hoping that you all boat into the Heaviside layer.
I'm hoping that you all boat onto Growl Tiger the Barge Cat's boat. Thank you very much.
Okay. So you don't want our audience to die then?
They don't.
Do you?
They don't die. They walk the plank and then get magicked away.
No, but when you go to the Heaviside layer, that's just people dying.
Oh.
It's just cats dying.
Did you
never notice that?
We can debate the plot of Cats in our next Cats episode.
Oh God.
Good tidings.
If the concept were to exist that I'm to explain, which it doesn't, in hypothetical terms, every form of art has a bucket, a container to categorize the format and style, the greats and the rotten. The podcast that you've just consumed did the work for you by scraping the bottom